Wow. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi, Shavis, Perek Beis, Halacha Hey. We're learning Daf Yud Dalid. We left off on Daf Yud Dalid, Amud Aleph, all the way on top of the Amud Amar Rabbi Zeira. And let's quickly review our sugya. So first of all, we learned yesterday on Daf Yud Gimel, Rab Chuna Bar Chia, who is explaining why did the Chachamim make as the determinant concerning what year does the produce belong to decide what type of meiser you give, and also to decide whether it's considered the product of the 6th year or whether it's considered the product of the 7th year, thus it having Kedusha Shvi'is. And even though we had psukim that we learned yesterday, that when it comes to grains and wine and oil, the determinant time is the year in which it reached a third of its maturity, in which it reached the shlish. So why would they make by the 4 products, the oides and the doichen and the progin and the shumshumim, and then later in the Mishnah, the other 2, why would they say that it goes after when it takes root? So Rab Chuna Bar Chia explained, and the words that he uses are she'i efsher la'amid alav, that we are interpreting to mean because it's too hard otherwise. Too hard otherwise means that we do not want for you to have one crop, a planted crop, that it should be divided into 2 separate tithing years. We don't want for that to happen. Even though at times, as we learned yesterday, it might happen, it could happen, but we try to prevent it from happening. And being that these 4 items, again, the oides, doichen, pragen, and shumshumim, as well as the pula mitzri and the afunim gedolim, as we'll see later, as soon as we get into the sugya, even though they're planted at the same time, they take root at the same time, but their pace of growth is not the same. If we would follow the rule of shlish, then all of these products would always be divided into 2 separate years of tithing. And since, let's add on top what we learned in the Marafulda, Shitas Rashi, Shitas Toisves, that other than grain, olives, and grapes, all other items only have to be tithed midrabanan. So the whole thing is midrabanan. So the Chachamim have the right to say that even though we see from the Torah there is the shlish is the determinant, we'll make up a new determinant, the hashrash. I want to add something that we didn't speak out yesterday. True, Rashi and Tosfos we quoted when it comes to the question of what year does it belong to vis-a-vis Maisres, Maiser Sheni or Maiser Ani. It's taka only midrabanan, but what about Shvi'is? Shmitas adin da'iraisa. And our Mishnahs joining together, the determinant is equally for Maiser, Sheni, Shlishi, Revi, Chamishi or Shishi, always Sheni or Ani. But the Mishnah also throws in over there Shvi'is. Shvi'is is a din Torah. The rationale would not work by Shvi'is. And indeed, many of the Rishonim say that this rationale only works for Shvi'is, that Bizman Azem is the Rabbanan. So only because whatever topic we are discussing, whether it is Maisis, whether it is the holding of Shemitah, since it's Midrabanan, the Chachamim have the right to establish a new determinant, even though, as we learned yesterday, from the Torah we see that by tirosh, that by grains and olives and grapes, we go after the shlish. This is where we're at. Now, amazing. The Gemara is going to begin today with Amar Rabbi Zeira, a new source, a new reason. Why again do the Chachamim say by oides and doichen and progin and shumshumim that we don't follow the shlish, we follow the hashrasha? We're going to have a new source, and just like we quoted the Braisa to challenge Rab Chuna Bar Chia, the Braisa that actually will begin, my friends, today. There's a Braisa that will begin on Daf Yud Daled Amud Beis all the way in the bottom, and it's going to go throughout the whole Daf Tezvav, and it's going to go into the top of Daf Tezayin. The Braisa is going to speak about 6 rules regarding the Pul HaMitzri. And when we get there, I checked yesterday, I found on Google I found mamish the seder of how this pul hamitzri, which we will interpret as fava beans. Why? Azoy state in the Google. Maybe it's wrong, but to see how it develops, just to get a better understanding that there are 6 rules regarding the fava bean, beginning with what we already learned in the Mishnah, Shimon Shizuri, and that is that it depends for what purpose did you plant it. Accordingly, will establish what determinant it will have. So if that's what we learned in the Mishnah, if people plant the pul hamitzri primarily to have its greens, then dinoi, like all other vegetables, and basar likutoi isurai, the determinant of what year does it belong to, Benegea Maisris and Benegea Shvi'is, will be when it was picked. If the kavana of the farmer, when he planted these beans, see, this is Egyptian kidney bean. The picture that I saw yesterday did not look like this, the fava beans. But anyways, we'll get to later. We'll debate about this later. If the kavana was for seeds, that was the whole chiddush. That's where Shimon Shizuri said that the pul hamitzri dinoi kiddin oides doichen pragen and shumshumin, that you go basar ashrasha. That is what we learned in the Mishnah. The Braisa will add 4 new cases, and they will be involved in scenarios where the person planted it for one kavana, and some point prior to it being harvested, the farmer changed the intent. And in one of the scenarios, the din is going to be that if the product that you grew came to its full growth, these are the words, to the full growth before Rosh Hashanah. Now, I know that there are going to be other factors that we will learn about tomorrow. We're not excluding other factors, but one of the factors will be that then, since it came to the full growth before Rosh Hashanah, the greens of the pul hamitzri will be tied like vegetables, but the seeds will be tied. It's amazing. If the produce continue to grow after Rosh Hashanah, then we view the greens as secondary to the seeds, and all of it will be tied. Basar ashrasha, all of it. Don't worry, you don't have to remember it because we're going to learn that tomorrow. Point is that there could be times where some of it was ready before Rosh Hashanah, some of it was ready after Rosh Hashanah. I want to review this. This is important. So now you have a harvest. And what year does it belong to? Some of it belongs to one year. Some of it belongs to another year. And this creates 2 issues. First of all, never can I tithe produce of one year to the other. Even going from the first to the second, the trumas and maasros are the same. Trum gedola, maaser rishon, maaser sheni. Nevertheless, you cannot be toidem umaasen michadash ala yashan umenayashan ala chadash. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is that if you go from the second year to the third year, or from the third to the fourth, or from the 5th to the 6th, or from the 6th to the 7th, it's a whole different set of rules. Maaser sheni, maaser ani, 6th or 7th. What do you do with that? So let me say it like this. Benegeya, you cannot be toidem umaasen from one year and the other, even though nothing is perfect. It's perfect enough halachically that if you take a whole group of fava beans, some of it belonged to last year, some of it belongs to this year. If you mix it, and the words of the Braisa is tsoiver as geroinoi l'toichoi, just pile in the goyren and all together and mix it up, then I'm going to say that whatever percent of maaser is going to be 10% from what remains. Truma is the same. Truma is going to be 2% average. From what remains, 10% maaser rishon. From what remains now, another 10%. I'm going to say that what came out in the 10% is proportional, equal to what is in the rest. So whatever percent of the rest belongs to this year, that's what you have in the truma, in the maaser. So you resolve the issue of you're not being toidem umaaser from one year and the other. You have some of it is from one year and some of it is from the other year. That resolves problem number 1. Problem number 2 is, okay, but how much of it is maaser sheni? How much of it is maaser ani? We don't know. And you have to cover all the bases. So there's going to be a chumrah. But how do you cover all the bases? First, you say all of this is maaser sheni. Now, God knows the truth. Let's say it's 50%. The 50% that's not maaser sheni, because it belongs to maaser ani, those words won't do anything bad. Just, it won't be anything. But whatever of it is, let's say 90% is maaser sheni. Let's say 10% is maaser sheni. You say all is maaser sheni. And therefore, you take money and you take the value, you're the owner plus a chaimish, of all of the maaser, and you say this money now is exchanging the maaser sheni. The kedusha goes into the money. I know that maybe not all the money will be holy. I don't care. I'm going to be taking all the money. What's the problem? I'm going to Yerushalmi. I'm going to buy food in Yerushalmi. Nothing bad happened. I covered the base of Meiser Sheni. Now it's redeemed. Some of it is Meiser Ani. Some of it never became Meiser Sheni. Some of it has to be given. I don't know how much. You give now all of it to the Aniyim. What was that? No. The 10% goes to the Ani. You eat the rest. Anyways, you would. In other that second separation is either Meiser Sheni or it's really a little bit of both. You end up designating all of it from Meiser Sheni. You pay then you give all of it to an Ani. You ended up giving a little more tzedakah. That's all that happened over here. Okay, now, guys, we're going to come back to this tomorrow, so don't worry. We're going to actually learn this brayso tomorrow. The point is that just like this brayso was brought yesterday to challenge Rab Chuna Bar Chia, it's amazing. The same brayso will be brought today to challenge Rab Zeira. And just like when we learned the Gemara yesterday, you can learn the Gemara as the Gemara left a question unanswered, or you can understand what the Gemara is trying to point out. I'm going to suggest today again that this won't be a checkmate. It's going to be a problem that the answer will be self-understood, which is perhaps why the Yerushalmi did not need to write the answer. That will be the conclusion of the Pul HaMitzri. And from there, the Gemara today, it's a small daf, and don't worry, but the Gemara is going to ask now, what is the source and why is it that by all vegetables do we go basar when you pick it? We began yesterday. How do you know by the doiraisas? By grain, wine, and we self-understood olives, you go basar shlish. So we had the 3 psukim yesterday. Now we are learning 2 reasons why oides, doichen, pragen, and shumshumim do we go basar ashrasha. Either a logic or Rab Zeira will be a pasuk. What's unresolved yet, I know we didn't speak about fruits yet, but 1 second. Today, we're going to add why vegetables. Why by vegetables that the Chazal say that you go after when you pick it. And if we'll have time, we'll start the actual Braisa that brings the 6 rules by Pul HaMitzri. And this Braisa, again, like we said, begins in today's daf. It's the whole daf Tezvav, and it's the top of daf Tezayin. I think we'll try to get through the first 2 rules, which is what we already spoke out. And then tomorrow, we're going to learn the other 4. That means, hopefully, it's small daf, and we'll be able to do that. Okay, Chavre, inside Daf Yud Dalet, Chavre, the beauty of today's daf is that if anyone, so much new information, needs to review the info, you're going to have a chazara of everything we learned right now. Okay, so what are we looking at? Why, by oires, doichen, pragen, and shumshumim, why did the sages say that the determinant to decide what year it belongs to is the hashrash? So Amar Rabbi Zeira, actually I have a pasuk, which is a lot better. Because really the problem is that since by grains, wine, and oil, or grapes and olives, we had remazim from psukim, basar shlish. So the question is, if you have from the Torah shlish, everything should be a shlish. Here we have a solution, Vlad. The Torah is also meramis. I have another emes. Now, where do we have that? The Torah is not speaking explicitly about oires, doichen, pragen, and shumshumim. Nor is the Torah speaking about the Pul HaMitzri or the Afunim Gedolim. True, but there is an inyan that has to be covered that will be problematic by the Oides, Doichen, Pragen, and Shumshumim. And what will that be? A pasuk in Bahar, the pasuk of Shemitah. When it says, Sheish Shonim Tizra Sodecha, then it really says, V'sheish Shonim Tizmar Karmecha. But those words are not important. V'asafta estvu asam. So when you learn the pasuk in the Pshat, the Torah is saying, for 6 years, sow your field. And during those 6 years, you can gather the produce kedarkoi. Kedarkoi, I'm adding those words in a regular manner. And on the Shemitah year, loy siktzar, which means not you can't harvest at all. It's wrong. You can harvest a lot. Not everything. Midarabanan, we said svichem not. But you can't, I can take an apple off the tree. You can't harvest it kedarkoi. That's the pshat. The nemes, the drasha is that when the Torah says 6 years you should sow, the Torah also use the word 6 years on the gathering. For 6 years you should sow, and 6 years you should gather, and that's going to be the limud. In other words, Hashem wants for us to be able to properly gather the produce for a whole 6 years. And we'll see how if you will not follow the determinant of Hashrasha by the Oides, Doichen, Pragan, and Shumshumim, you're not going to have 6 years. So say the Chazal, don't only read the words of Sheishanim as it's linked explicitly to the planting. The 6 years is also linked to the gathering. Shisha Zarin and Vishisha Asifim. Now, the Gemara is going to word something one way, and we're going to really change it in a moment in the other way, but let's begin. What are we excluding? Not 6 years you should plant and 7 years you should gather. Now, let me say it like this, guys. When you plant rice, let me just say we're giving the whole sugya is going to be based on a premise that these items, oides, doichin, paragin, and shumshumim, are planted once a year. I'm going in premise number one. I'll tell you why, Vlad. Because if we're supposed to have 6 years of planting and 6 years of gathering, any product that will be planted twice a year, which I'm sure you could, then you have 12 gatherings. In other words, we're going with the premise that people plant whatever it is that they're planting once a year, but what you should be able to harvest the produce at the 7th year, not your plant, not your harvest. But for 6 years, plant and 6 years your harvest. So first of all, we're speaking about people that only plant once a year. Number two, again, a premise, a given, that oides, doichin, paragin, and shumshumim are primarily planted towards the end of the year. And premise number three, all of this to work, Vlad, is that when you plant these 4 towards the end of the year, most of it reaches a third after Rosh Hashanah. Now, very simple. If the determinant of oides, doichin, I'm just going to say oides, of rice, is after shlish, so what you planted on the 6th, you won't be able to harvest. So how many harvesting will you have? 5. Now that's really what the Gemara meant to say. What the Gemara begins to say is, don't plant it on, don't have something where you plant for 6 years and you harvest it on 7 years. Now, I can still say why you can harvest it on 7 years. Because the little bit of rice that grew before Rosh Hashanah, or that reached a shlish before Rosh Hashanah, the little bit of rice that reached a shlish before Rosh Hashanah, if the shlish is the determinant, then you can harvest it even in the 7th year. We don't know which one will be which. One thing is clear, that by these 4 items, based on the premise, we're speaking about farmers that only planted once a year. Based on the second rule that people normally planted it towards the end of the Jewish calendar year. That if you're not going to use Hashrasha as the determinant, the Gemara begins to say, you won't only have 6, you're going to have 7. And the Gemara says that's not true. If you go by the Shlish, the Gemara right away corrects itself. You won't have 6, you'll only have 5. Because the Metzias is, in other words, they said that the determinant is not the Shlish, the determinant is earlier. Now it works. So every time you plant 6 times, on Shemitah you don't plant. On Shemitah you don't plant. What you planted the first year, I'm saying right now, was also planted at the end of the year. So when do you harvest it? In the next year. So you don't have the first year. And if Shlish will be the determinant, then you won't even have the 6th year, because it reaches the Shlish after Rosh Hashanah. There's only 5. That's really what, but instead of saying 6 and not 5, he said 6 and not 7. And the Gemara says, no, it's not 6 and not 7. It's 6 and not 5. That lets you. But don't. If Shlish would be the determinant, then you'll be able to harvest it 7 times. But we don't want you to be able to harvest it 7 times. 6. The Gemara says, no. That's not what Rabbi Zajac said. Beshita leinan yochlan kaiman. You don't even have 6. You don't even have 6, because since people planted it towards the end of the year, and since generally it would reach 1/3 after Rosh Hashanah, you don't even have 6. What you planted on the 6th year, you can't harvest. So you're telling me Ella B'Shiva? You're telling me the limit is 6 and not 7? No. That's not what Rabbi Zajac meant. Kani, what did he say? Yeah, the Torah says Shisha Shanim Tizra. Take the word Shisha, apply it to the gathering. 6, and not 6, 5. Shisha Zarin. You want to have 6 plantings and 6 asifim. And if the determinant by the oiris, doichen, pragin, and shumshumin that's normally planted towards the end of the year, that generally reaches a third only after Rosh Hashanah, if the shlish will be the determinant, then you're going to have these items that even though you could plant it 6 years, you can plant it in year number 1 towards the end of the year, you can plant it in year number 6, but you'll only have chamsha asifin. You're only going to have 5 gatherings. So what's the solution? Very simple. Says the Chazal, no. By these items, hashrasha. People planted it at the end of the year, but it did hashrasha at the end of the 6th year. So since it's the product of the 6th, you can gather it on the 7th year. What can you not gather on the 7th year? Produce of the 7th year. Produce of the 6th year you can gather. And therefore, this will be like everything else that God only told us to rest 1 year, not 2 years. Resting means Hashem wants us that during a cycle of 7 years, you should be able once a year to plant a product and you should be able to gather it. So that is how they solve 6 and 6 and not 6 and 5. Beautiful.
Roots.
Very clear. In other words, that's what we're learning in the Mishnah. That since the determinant is when it took root, something that's planted towards the end of the year, even though it reached the third after Rosh Hashanah, forget about it became mature way after Rosh Hashanah. It's still produce of the 6th year. Produce of the 6th year you can gather, even though it's on the 7th year. Now, Daf Yudal Damed Beis, the Gemara is going to give the same exact challenge we had on Rab Chuna Bar Chia, and that is Hativoin. Hativoin means Meisvei. I have a problem. I have an objection from the Braisa that we're going to start to learn at the bottom of this Amid. When it comes to the Pula Mitzri, that the Braisa says, again, there are the 6 dinim, Sheish Midois Omru Chachamim Pula Mitzri. And here we are speaking about one of the scenarios where the planter changed his intent between the planting and the harvesting. And now there you have all of these factors, how to determine what's the determinant. And in some scenarios, at the end of the day, you're going to have a harvest that will have in it some Pula Mitzri that belongs to 1 year, some Pula Mitzri that belongs to another year. And the solution for that would be, like we spoke about in an introduction, Shaharei over there, by this Pula Mitzri, there's going to be Shisha Zeroyim and only Chamsha Asifin. There will be a time you're only going to have Chamsha Asifin, as we learned in the Braisa. And when you mix items together, number 1, even though you're not allowed to be Toirim Uma'asid, Mena Chodesh ala Yoshan, V'loi Mena Yoshan ala Chodesh, but when you have Chodesh and Yoshan mixed together, when there's no other option, then we can say that everything is mixed together. So when I separate from it a Meiser, in the separation, I have the right proportion. Mena Chodesh ala Chodesh, Umena Yoshan ala Yoshan, and V'chulei, as we explained in the intro, and we'll explain again tomorrow, the Nimsa Ma'aser Mizarei al Yarka Miyarka Yalzarei, which is exactly what we mean. So what the problem is, that the solution is to mix it all together, even though some of the produce belongs to the coming year. Some of the produce will belong to the coming year. That part of the produce that belongs to the coming year, the Braisa is speaking about Meiser Sheni, Meiser Ani. But let's go back to our topic. What happens if a person plants Pula Mitzri at the end of the 6th year? And you're telling me that some of what you planted will belong to the 7th year. That part doesn't have 6 harvesting, because what is halachically part of the 7th year may not be harvested. So if we're having a limud of the Torah, Shei Shanim, and the Shei Shanim doesn't only go on Tizra, the Shei Shanim goes on the Ve'osafta, you have to admit that there will be times that you're going to plant something 6 times, at the end of year number 1, at the year of number 2, at the end of year number 6, and some of that, because of the kavanas, won't belong to year number 6. And that taka will not allow to be harvested. So, and which means there's only going to be 5 harvestings. And the Gemara doesn't answer. The Gemara doesn't answer. I think, again, not because it's like teku. No. Yeah, when Hashem says, first of all, Hashem didn't say you have to gather 6 times. What happens if there's a farmer that for whatever reason he doesn't want to make an asifa? He doesn't want to. He's not chayiv to do it. The Torah wants for us to have a system where generally you can plant and you can harvest. And a chanami. Will there be a case, like we're going to learn soon in this Braisa, that by Pul HaMitzri, when you begin to change your kavanas, that some of it will not have 6 harvestings? Yeah. But there's still a logic to say that Zajac stands that why did the Chachamim say Oiris, Doichen, Pragan, and Shumshumim, and sometimes Pula Mitzri, and sometimes the Afunim Gedoilim, as we learned at the end of the Mishnah, Halacha Hey, that it goes after the Hashrasha, because if you're not going to allow Hashrasha to be the determinant, then you will never have the 6 gatherings. And you're right, and sometimes you're still not going to have it. And let's leave it at that. The other big klal that the Mishnah didn't even give us, but to appreciate the Mishnah, we gave the intro. So grains, olives, and grapes after shlish. When it comes to general vegetables, so the words are, like we said, bishas liki tosoi isuroi, that the determinant is pashit when either machlekes rishonim, when it's ready to be harvested, or when you actually harvested it. That's the general rule. So what's the source of that? Same kasha. Now that we had yesterday, a whole source from the Psukim and the Torah, including the din of Hakel, that it follows the shlish. So let vegetables follow a shlish. I mean, that's the source. Why are we making up new determinants? Gavaldik, the Gemara answers. And now we're going to quote the same pasuk that we began yesterday's Gemara with, which ultimately led to the grains of shlish. The same pasuk at the end of the A. We read the San Yom Tov, where it says Chag Asukos Tasaloch Shivas Yamim, and then the Torah says Ba'aspecha Mi Garnecha Umi Yikvecha. Now a new limud. So since it says Mi Garnecha Umi Yikvecha, now Ma Goyden v'Yakov. The rule is, the Metzias is, Shehein Choyin Mimei Hashana Sha'avra, the 5 grains, and olives, and grapes. I don't care when I pick them. The main source of their nourishment, of their water nourishment, is dafka. The main is from the water that grew in the beginning of the season. So even though 1/3 is a lot less than the next 2/3, I want you to know that the main nourishment that these products have when they are fully mature was injected in them during the first third. So we are actually learning it from the grains. We're not learning the shlish. We're using the shlish to be almost as not the root. The root is not the third. The root is that you want to know what year it belongs to. Both concerning Maasros and concerning Shemitah, I want to know from what waters did it get its primary nourishment. That which gets its primary nourishment only when it's growing its first third, like it goes after the first third. The metzias of vegetables is that the vegetables do not get the primary nourishment by its first third of growth. Actually, it's an amazing phenomenon by vegetables, that if a vegetable is a certain size and it gives a rain right now, it's going to mamish get a lot bigger. It gets its nourishment from now. And 2/3 is more than 1/3. I want you to know, Masha'enkin, let's say by the grape. You have to know the mitzvahs. By the grape, if the first rains in the beginning was weak, that won't even help that much that it's raining now when it's growing the next 2/3. And vegetables are not that way. This is a Metzias thing. It's amazing. That's just like Ma Goyim the Yaakov. Shehein Choyim Mimei Hashana Sha'avra. I'm using the words primary. That their primary mizoinus. What do you get filled when you eat a meal? From the fish or from the flesh they had at the end? Like some people get their nourishment from the beginning, some people get the nourishment from the end. They get it from the beginning, and indeed, that's why that's why the Torah signs, we're speaking about the grains and the grapes and the olives, what are they assigned to? They are assigned to the year whose rain produced their principal nourishment. They are assigned to the year whose rains gave them their main nourishment. Let me use that when it comes to vegetables. And that is l'shavar. Oh. So now, ve'elu, when it comes to vegetables, their primary source of nourishment, the roiv. I'm using the words present, because 2/3 is more than a third. You can't go after the first third. No. Actually, if a vegetable began very weak, because there was very bad rains, it can mamish do tshuva. It makes everything a plus by the end. The main source of nourishment is the final rains. So therefore, and what will be the determinant? When you harvest it, when you pick it, or let me say when it's ready to be picked. Once it's ready to, no, that's why the Rishonim say when it's ready to be picked, because once it stops growing, even though you didn't pick it, now it's not getting any new nourishment. Let's say it's ready to be picked Chav Tes Elul. And that means that even if it would be raining, it's not going to grow anymore. If it's not going to grow anymore, then why? Then based on this logic, you're not going to say that I picked it on some Gedalia, it belongs to the next year. No, you're not, because it got its nourishment from the rains of last year. It has to do. If it's still growing, then it's still getting nourishment. Guys, this is very meaningful, because when it comes to chinuch, I want to use the words, when it comes to chinuch, right? And it's interesting, right? Adam Eitz Asada, all of the sichos of the Rebbe, about how important it is, David, when it comes to the earlier years of a child. In other words, sometimes we say that, right, that's the whole mashal of the Rebbe, that if you have a tree, if you make a little scratch on the tree, little scratch when it's little, when the tree grows, the scratch will grow. It will be a terrible blemish. When the tree is already older, you give a scratch. We're not saying to scratch, but if you do that, it doesn't get worse. No, sometimes we look at a person that you're like a fruit, like a tree, and the ikid is the earlier years. A vegetable, I want to be like a vegetable is the base of a Baal Tshuva. No matter what happened when I was younger, my main source of nourishment is not what happened in my first third year of life. No, right now. Even if I had very bad nourishment, now I'm going to get a good injection of whatever, of something holy. Now I'm going to grow. Are you a fruit? Are you a vegetable? Fruit is a tzaddik, and a vegetable is a Baal Tshuva. All right, the Rabbi is not here to protest, so let's let me run away. Let's go back. And now, yet again, now this is Gavaldik. This can be worded as a kasha. Or maybe I'm going to make a suggestion. If I can ask for Kevin to put up on the screen, I found yesterday on Google, I Googled growth stages of fava beans. I want people to see it. Pasha, to see how it grows. And which is amazing. So let's go. Hativain, the Gemara is challenging this concept. Let's go back to the Pola Mitzri. And what are the first two rules that we're going to still have today on Daf Yud Daled Amud Beis? The first two of the 6 midos by the Pola Mitzri is that, do you tithe it as a vegetable? Do you tithe it as rice? Is it about harvesting, lekita? Is it about hashrasha? The first simple rule is it depends on your intent. The rule is that if you plant Pola Mitzri zoroi lezera, if you planted it because you wanted seed, then we say hashrasha. Then misaser l'sha'avar. That's the rule. Like oides and doichen. If you planted the Pola Mitzri for the yerek part of it, to the greens part of it, then dinoi, like a vegetable, misaser l'haba. And what are we explaining right now? This is Gavaldik. We're explaining right now that the reason why we differentiate Chevra Haltkop between the shlish of the Dagan and Tirosh, migarnacha umiyekvecha, versus the vegetables, we're saying we're not even differentiating. It's all the same rule. The rule is we want to know that they took life from the rains of what year. So let me ask you a question. It sounds like the Gemara is asking, is the vegetable a magician? Does the fava bean that you planted in the ground, frek the Gemara, v'kismei biyado yakoisa, means a magician? Is the seed a magician? Does it know what was your intent? The Pola Mitzri, what does it grow from? Does it grow from the beginning of the rains? Does it grow from the end of the rains? If it grows, if it grows from the beginning of the rains, then it should go after the shlish. If it grows at the end of the rains, then it should be determined by when you picked it. Why does your kavan of you, the owner, you're the farmer, why should that make any difference? What? The seed is a magician that it knows why it was planted in the ground? What a beautiful v'kismei biyadai, that zeroi lezera, that if the owner planted the seed, what lezera, primarily for its seed. So then the seed decides in the ground, you know what? Oy bazoi, You planted me for my seeds, so then now I'm going to take my main nourishment from the beginning. If you planted me liyerek, now I'm going to take my main nourishment. It doesn't know that. So that doesn't fit with the biur that the Gemara gave. That's one way of reading it. Now, I want to make a following suggestion. Again, even though he didn't find it, Kevan, but I'm going to just read out what guys, I got this from Google. So, but just when you plant, first of all, what is Egyptian bean? I'm going with the premise. I put an Egyptian bean and it showed me not the purple thing that Kevan found. I don't know how he found it. And there was a shame Levi. So you're wrong. It's the fava bean. When you put the green, let me tell you the stages of growth as it's Vishishtei in Google. Number one, it germinates. That's the first step. We're learning this. Hashrasha. Germinating is hashrasha. Right? The Chassidus says the old has to rot. And when there's a bittul, I'm a bittul b'metzias, that's when you have the quantum leap from going from a seed, yesh, la'ayin, liyesh. So it takes, first of all, 7 to 14 days. I found that fascinating because when we learned about taking root, I know that every case is a case, but we had in the Tana, we had 3 days, we had 30 days, we had 2 weeks, also 2 weeks. Okay, number two, the seed, something begins to emerge on the ground. Now, this emergence from the ground, I want to repeat. There is a din of svichim. Svichim is asar midrabanan. Nowadays, halacha l'maisa, when you put something in the ground on the 6th year, if it only emerged a little bit, which is after the hashrasha, the next stage is the seedling begins to emerge. You can see a picture on Google. Once that happens, it's already midine derabanan of svichim mutter on the 7th year. Because you can say it belongs to the 6th year. Even though nowhere do we define the concept of it emerged off the ground. We don't have that. We have that by Chanata. But I'm saying that benegeh dineh derabanan of svichim that we didn't even learn inside the Gemara yet. Afterwards, the vegetation begins to grow. The vegetation begins to grow. After the vegetation grows, then there's a flowering. After the flowering, then the pod begins to form. And then there's the pot filling. The pot filling is the seed. And then it goes to maturation. No, the filling of the pot is the seed. The seeds are in the pods. We know all these things. You open up the pot. So just the metzias is that the vegetation growth begins prior to the seeds. But I'm still going to argue that maybe the vegetation growth begins prior to the seeds, but like any other vegetables, if the rains were weak, so the vegetation part of it will be, let's say, small. If it rains later, it's going to grow a lot. It's going to make up. Maybe the vegetation part gets nourished from waters. And when the waters come early, it grows early. If it comes late, it grows late. But the seeds, even though the pot formation and the pot filling, the metzias develops later, but from what nourishment? The seeds are being nourished from the earlier rains. So that's why it should go Bashar Ashrasha. No, it's maybe the kiss may be yadai, even though the Gemara, this is a lashon of a kasha, but maybe that's taka the answer. The answer is that the vegetation part grows. Let me use the words of the Gemara, mimei hashana haba. The seeds part grow mimei hashana sha'avra, primarily. And therefore, your kavana determines what's the ikad, what's the tuffle, that we have the right. So if I planted it for vegetable, so since I'm the owner, we look at it as a vegetable, and mitzad the vegetable, even though again the vegetation begins to develop bigashmias prior to the pod formation and the pod filling, but it keeps on growing. The vegetation keeps on growing. The pods, they develop later, but it's already too late. It's already done. It's like when a child develops in the womb. It is what it is. The DNA is what it is. Just because it takes 9 months to develop, but the koyach of the child is determined. That's the beginning of Tanya. By the moment that the child got pregnant, that's when the malach determines. Chalash, gibor, all of these things are determined right away. Right away. Because kavanah will matter to determine whether we view this as a vegetable plant or whether we view this as a seed. By vegetables, the determinant of what year does it belong to is likutoi. the determinant by a seed when it comes to the pul hamitzri, not a third, by the pul hamitzri, like the oidus doichen, pragan, and shumshumin, was rash rash. I think it's gewaltig. Let's go back.
Is the logic for like hashtrasha you were explaining about when does it get its nourishment for the water? You're using the same logic for hashtrasha and shlish.
Yes, I am, Mendel. Rabbi
Okay.
Mendel. Yes, it has to be. That's a suggestion. The Gemara seems to be asking Akasha, which is cute. The kiss may be yade without an answer. And I know this is for sure that in the Yerushalmi, many questions are unanswered because they expected us to see the answer. They were makatze. They want Rabbi Yochanan is sharing the discussions they had in the Beis Medrash. And the good teachers, real good teachers, they're not going to feed you the whole food. This is the question, and I think he's expecting of us to chop what they answered in the Beis Medrash. I think what I'm saying, if what I'm saying is b'mitzias wrong, then I'm wrong. It could be what I'm saying is right. He didn't even find it important to answer the question. Okay, let's go weiter. Now, Rab Shimon Shizuri Amar, even though the Gemara is going on Shimon Shizuri, really, we are referring to the next. We keep on quoting Rab Shimon. Let me just review the Mishnah by heart. Guys, don't confuse Rab Shimon Shizuri and the next Rab Shimon. So we already established the Pul HaMitzri. We had enough, and we're going to learn the whole tomorrow will be the Pul HaMitzri. The final din in the Mishnah is called Afunim HaGamloinim. Afunim HaGamloinim, he teaches, is some sort of large bean. What is this large bean? I have no idea. But the Mishnah said 2 steps. Rab Shimon, Stam Rab Shimon is the Rashbi. Rab Shimon says, I'm quoting the words of the Mishnah, that Afunim HaGamloinim is Kayoytze Bahem. Kayoytze Bahem means it's like the Pul HaMitzri, which means it depends for what did you plant it for. If you planted it for its vegetation, then dinoi, like all vegetables, nekuda, that which is basar likutoi isurai. Here it's simple. If you planted it for its seed, then again, that will be the 6th exception, which would be not the din of a shlish, not the din of basar likutoi, not the din of chanata. Anaya din, hashrasha will be the determinant. That is Rab Shimon. On Rab Shimon said the Tana Rab Lazar. And like we learned, this is important, that Rab Lazar is not arguing with Rab Shimon, he's qualifying Rab Shimon. That when did Rab Shimon you say that you follow hashrasha, when you planted the afunim gedolim for its seed, that's only if, and here are his words, shetirmelu lifnei Rosh Hashanah. Only if shetirmelu lifnei Rosh Hashanah, then you follow hashrasha. The determinant is the hashrasha, but we need for the tirmelu to happen. So mau tirmelu, what does it mean? So the Gemara explains, avdun kan kulin. It means that the pods have compartments. Like we mentioned, you have the germination, you have the seedling emergence, you have the vegetation growth. After the vegetation growth, something is called the flowering. After the flowering, you have the pod formation. The pod formation has 2 steps. You have the pod. We all know what peas in the pod. We know what a pod is. But if you open up a pod, in the pod, there are steps of development of the pod. And the tirmelu means that inside the pod, you have these little pockets. That stage needed to happen before Rosh Hashanah. Okay, and now what's the halacha? Omar Rabbi Bar Zavda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, azos to wissen that even though it's a das yachid, nevertheless the halacha by Pul HaMitzri is Rabbi Shimon HaShizuri, and indeed, which is a chiddush, and Omar Rabbi Yoisa that hoire Rabbi Lazar le Rabbi Shapsai the Tzedoiki kehado the Rabbi Shimon HaShizuri. Again, even Rabbi Shimon HaShizuri says it depends on the kavana. It's not that Pul HaMitzri is always like oides doichen, pragan and shumshumim, but if you planted it for its seed, then the din will be basar hashrash. And now let's begin. I know it's 6:59. Okay, we can stop over here. Let's stop over here. We don't have to rush. And again, what we have to have learned now is we learned you planted Pul HaMitzri lezera, you planted Pul HaMitzri for the vegetable. You changed intentions. The changing intentions will create 4 cases. So you can have a glatte case, a simple case, a straight case, the zera or yarak, and then there'll be, in addition to those 2, another 4 cases. And there'll be many factors altogether to determine what year it belongs to. That's what we're looking all about this Egyptian bean. I think after learning tomorrow's daf, we should make up Egyptian bean soup or something. To understand, to taste, to be toyim.